The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard of Naval Base Charleston as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the black sedan that had brought her from the airport. She wore a simple Navy uniform without any visible rank insignia, carrying only a standard-issue duffel bag and a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to her father. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another young officer reporting for duty. Sarah had requested this low-profile arrival specifically. After 15 years of rapid advancement through the ranks, including commanding 3 different vessels and serving in 2 combat zones, she understood the importance of observing a unit before making her presence known. The Pentagon had chosen her for this assignment precisely because of her ability to assess and transform struggling military installations. As she walked toward the main administrative building, Sarah noticed the base had an air of casual disorganization that immediately concerned her. Several junior enlisted personnel walked past without proper military bearing, their uniforms slightly disheveled. 2 petty officers stood near the entrance, engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument about duty assignments, their voices carrying across the courtyard in a way that would never be tolerated on a well-run installation. The base had been struggling with morale issues for months. The previous commanding officer had been relieved of duty following a series of incidents involving improper conduct and poor leadership decisions. Discipline had deteriorated, and there were reports of various cliques forming among the personnel, creating an environment of favoritism and harassment that the Navy hierarchy was determined to eliminate. Sarah approached the reception desk in the main building, where a young seaman was typing on a computer while talking on the phone about weekend plans. When she cleared her throat, the seaman looked up with an expression of mild annoyance. "Can I help you with something?" the seaman asked, not bothering to stand or show any military courtesy. "I need to speak with the duty officer," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm reporting for assignment." The seaman glanced at her uniform, noting the absence of visible rank. "New recruit, huh? You'll need to wait. The duty officer is busy with real Navy business." Sarah simply nodded and took a seat in the waiting area. From her position, she could observe the flow of personnel through the building and listen to conversations that revealed much about the base's current state. What she heard confirmed many of the reports that had reached Washington. A group of petty officers gathered near the water cooler, openly discussing how they planned to break in the new personnel arriving that week. Their conversation included crude jokes and descriptions of hazing activities that had supposedly become tradition at the base. One of them, a stocky man with sergeant stripes, seemed to be the ringleader of these activities. "Fresh meat always thinks they know everything," he was saying to his companions. "We'll show them how things really work around here. Especially the females. They need to understand their place." Another member of the group, a tall woman with short brown hair, laughed at this comment. "Remember that last one who thought she was hot stuff because she went to the academy? She learned quick enough after we put her through orientation." Sarah continued to listen while maintaining a neutral expression. She made mental notes about the individuals involved and their apparent attitudes toward newer personnel. This type of toxic behavior was exactly what she had been sent to address, though she hadn't expected to witness it so blatantly on her first morning. After waiting for nearly an hour, during which time she observed numerous breaches of military protocol and unprofessional behavior, Sarah was finally called to meet with the duty officer. Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez appeared to be a competent officer, though he seemed stressed and overwhelmed by the challenges he was facing. "Sorry about the wait," Rodriguez said, as he showed Sarah into his office. "Things have been pretty chaotic around here lately. We're short-staffed, and frankly, some of the personnel have been difficult to manage." Sarah introduced herself using only her name and mentioned that she was there for a temporary assignment to assist with administrative duties. She deliberately kept her background vague, allowing Rodriguez to assume she was a junior officer being rotated through different departments for experience. "Well, we can certainly use the help," Rodriguez said, clearly relieved to have additional personnel. "I'll have Petty Officer Williams show you around and get you settled. Fair warning though, some of the crew here can be pretty rough on newcomers. They have their own way of doing things, and they don't always appreciate change or new faces." As if summoned by their conversation, there was a knock on the door. The stocky petty officer Sarah had observed earlier entered the office, This was clearly Williams, the same man who had been discussing hazing activities at the water cooler. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Williams asked, though his tone lacked the proper respect typically shown to a superior officer. "Williams, this is Lieutenant Mitchell. She's here on temporary assignment to help with administrative duties. I want you to show her around the base and help her get oriented." Williams looked Sarah up and down with an expression that was barely concealed contempt. "Another college girl who thinks she knows how the Navy works, huh?" he said, not bothering to address her directly. Rodriguez appeared uncomfortable with Williams's attitude but didn't correct him. Sarah realized that the leadership vacuum at the base had allowed individuals like Williams to operate with impunity, creating an environment where normal military discipline had broken down. "I'll take good care of the new recruit," Williams continued, his tone suggesting anything but helpful intentions. "We have a special orientation program for people like her." Sarah simply nodded and followed Williams out of the office. As they walked through the corridors, he began describing the various departments and facilities, but his commentary was filled with inappropriate remarks and veiled threats about what happened to personnel who didn't fit in with the existing culture. "The thing you need to understand," Williams said as they walked past the mess hall, "is that this isn't some fancy academy where everything goes by the book. Out here in the real Navy, we have our own rules. People who try to change things or act like they're better than everyone else tend to have a hard time." They passed a group of junior enlisted personnel who were clearly not working, instead gathered around a television watching a sports program during what should have been duty hours. Williams made no attempt to correct this behavior, instead nodding approvingly at the scene. "See? We believe in work-life balance here," he said sarcastically. "Not like those uptight bases where they make you follow every little regulation." Sarah continued to observe and listen, building a comprehensive picture of the problems plaguing the installation. The base was clearly operating well below Navy standards, with systematic issues that went far beyond simple morale problems. The leadership had allowed a culture of disrespect and unprofessionalism to take root, creating conditions that would inevitably lead to more serious incidents if left uncorrected. As the day progressed, Sarah was introduced to other members of Williams's group. Each interaction revealed additional examples of the toxic environment that had developed. Personnel openly discussed inappropriate relationships, substance abuse, and various schemes to avoid duty responsibilities. The behavior was so blatant that Sarah began to wonder how it had been allowed to continue for so long without intervention from higher command. The situation was worse than the reports had indicated, and Sarah realized that the transformation she had been sent to accomplish would require more than simple administrative changes. The entire culture of the base would need to be rebuilt from the ground up, and that process would undoubtedly meet with significant resistance from those who had benefited from the current chaos. Sarah's second week at the base began with what Williams and his group had ominously referred to as her real orientation. She had spent the previous days quietly documenting the various violations of military protocol and building relationships with some of the more professional personnel who seemed genuinely concerned about the base's direction. The morning started normally enough, with Sarah reporting to her assigned desk in the administrative section. She had been given routine filing and data entry tasks, work that was clearly designed to keep her busy with meaningless activities, rather than involve her in any substantive operations. Williams had made it clear that newcomers needed to earn their place before being trusted with important responsibilities. Around mid-morning, Williams approached her desk with several of his associates in tow. The group included the tall woman Sarah had observed on her first day, along with two other petty officers who had been involved in various incidents of unprofessional behavior she had witnessed. "Mitchell," Williams said loudly, drawing the attention of everyone in the administrative area. "Time for your performance evaluation." Sarah looked up from her work, maintaining a calm expression despite recognizing that this was likely the beginning of the harassment campaign Williams had been planning. "I wasn't aware that performance evaluations were conducted in this manner," she replied evenly. Williams laughed, and his companions joined in. "See? This is exactly the problem with you, academy types. You think you know everything about military procedure, but you don't understand how things work in the real world." The confrontation was clearly designed to humiliate Sarah in front of the other personnel and establish Williams's dominance over what he perceived to be a challenge to his informal authority. Several other staff members had stopped their work to watch the scene unfold, some appearing uncomfortable while others seemed entertained by the prospect of seeing another newcomer put in their place. "Let's talk about your performance so far," Williams continued, pulling out a clipboard with papers that appeared to be fabricated evaluation forms. "Your attitude needs serious adjustment. You've been asking too many questions about procedures and regulations. That tells me you don't respect the way we do things here." One of Williams's companions, a petty officer named Stevens, stepped forward. "We've also noticed you eating lunch by yourself instead of socializing with the team. That shows poor integration and suggests you think you're too good for the rest of us." The woman in the group, Petty Officer Chen, added her own criticism. "And your work output has been substandard. The filing system you've been using doesn't match our established methods, which creates extra work for everyone else." Sarah listened to these criticisms, recognizing them as a textbook example of workplace harassment designed to create a hostile environment for targeted individuals. Each complaint was either trivial, subjective, or based on standards that had never been properly communicated to her. "I appreciate the feedback," Sarah said calmly. "Perhaps you could show me the written procedures for these established methods, so I can ensure my work meets your standards." This response clearly irritated Williams, who had expected either defensive arguing or submissive acceptance of the criticism. "You see? This is exactly what I'm talking about. Always trying to make everything complicated with paperwork and procedures. We run things differently here." The situation escalated when Williams decided to make the confrontation more personal. "The problem with people like you," he said, stepping closer to Sarah's desk, "is that you come in here thinking your college degree and your pretty uniform make you special. But this is the real Navy, sweetheart. Not some classroom." The use of the condescending term sweetheart was clearly intended to be demeaning and inappropriate. Several of the observing personnel shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that Williams had crossed a line into clearly unacceptable behavior. Sarah stood up from her chair, maintaining her composure despite the obvious provocation. "I think this conversation has moved beyond constructive feedback," she said. "If you have specific concerns about my work performance, I suggest we discuss them with Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez." Williams laughed again, but there was an edge of anger in his voice now. "Rodriguez? He's got his own problems to worry about. This is between you and us. And we're not done talking." Stevens moved to block the path between Sarah's desk and the exit, while Chen positioned herself on the other side. The body language was clearly intimidating, designed to make Sarah feel trapped and vulnerable. "Here's how this is going to work," Williams said, his voice dropping to a more threatening tone. "You're going to learn to follow our rules and show proper respect, or you're going to find yourself with a very difficult time here. We've helped other problem personnel understand their situation, and we're prepared to help you too." The threat was barely veiled, and Sarah realized that this group had likely engaged in similar harassment of other personnel who had challenged their informal authority. The reference to helping other problem personnel suggested a pattern of behavior that had been tolerated or overlooked by the compromised leadership structure. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Sarah asked, her tone remaining calm but carrying a subtle authority that seemed to surprise Williams. "I'm suggesting," Williams said, emboldened by what he perceived as her isolation and vulnerability, "that you need an attitude adjustment. And if you're not willing to accept guidance from your more experienced colleagues, then maybe you need a more direct lesson in how things work around here." The confrontation had now moved well beyond inappropriate workplace behavior into the realm of actual threats and intimidation. Sarah recognized that Williams was essentially challenging her to either submit to his authority or face escalating harassment that could potentially include physical intimidation or worse. Several other personnel in the area had stopped pretending to work and were now openly watching the confrontation. Some appeared concerned about the situation, while others seemed to be waiting to see how Sarah would respond to Williams's challenge. "You know what your problem is?" Williams continued, apparently interpreting Sarah's calm demeanor as weakness. "You think you can just walk in here and change everything to suit yourself, but this base has been running just fine without your input, and it'll keep running just fine after you learn your place." Chen stepped closer, adding her own intimidating presence. Some people need to learn the hard way that respect has to be earned, not just demanded because of some piece of paper from the academy. The situation had reached a critical point where Williams's group clearly expected Sarah to either back down completely or escalate into an emotional response that would justify further harassment. They had obviously used similar tactics successfully against other personnel, and were confident that their informal authority within the base's dysfunctional culture would protect them from consequences. Sarah looked around the room, taking note of all the personnel who were witnessing the confrontation. Then she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a leather folder that she had kept closed since her arrival at the base. "Before this goes any further," she said quietly, "I think there are some things you should know about my background and my actual position here." Williams laughed dismissively. "Oh, here we go. Let me guess. Daddy was an admiral? Or you have some important friends in Washington? We've heard all those stories before." Sarah opened the folder and pulled out a set of documents, including orders that bore official seals and signatures. "Actually," she said, her voice taking on a different quality that carried unmistakable authority, "I think you'll find my situation is somewhat different from what you've assumed." The change in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. The calm, observant newcomer, who had been quietly enduring harassment, was gone, replaced by someone whose bearing and tone suggested significant military experience and authority. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she continued, "and I hold the rank of captain in the United States Navy. I am here under direct orders from the Pentagon to assume command of this installation and address the serious disciplinary and leadership issues that have been reported to the highest levels of Navy command." The effect of this revelation was immediate and dramatic. Williams's confident smirk disappeared, replaced by an expression of growing alarm as the implications of what Sarah had just said began to register. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "I have spent the past 2 weeks conducting a comprehensive assessment of this base's operations, personnel, and culture. Your behavior, along with that of your associates, has been documented and will be included in my report to Fleet Command." The entire administrative area had gone completely silent. Personnel who had been watching the confrontation with amusement now stared in shock as they realized they had just witnessed a group of petty officers threatening and intimidating their new commanding officer. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation seemed to stretch forever. William stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as his brain struggled to process what he had just heard. The confident swagger that had defined his behavior moments before had evaporated completely, replaced by a look of pure terror. As he realized the magnitude of his mistake, Stevens and Chen appeared equally stunned, their intimidating postures now seeming ridiculous and inappropriate. The other personnel in the administrative area watched in fascination as the power dynamic that had ruled the base for months crumbled in real time. Sarah allowed the silence to continue for several long moments, understanding that the psychological impact of her revelation needed time to fully register. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. "Petty Officer Williams," she said, using his rank and name with the formal precision that marked serious military business, "you and your associates will report to Conference Room B in 15 minutes. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez will join us there to discuss your future with this command." Williams attempted to speak, but only managed to produce a strangled sound. His face had gone pale, and sweat was visible on his forehead despite the air conditioning in the building. "Ma'am," Stevens finally managed to say, his voice cracking with nervousness, "we didn't know. Nobody told us you were." "Nobody told you I was what, Petty Officer Stevens?" Sarah asked with deceptive calm. "Nobody told you I was an officer who deserved basic military courtesy? Nobody told you that threatening and intimidating fellow service members was inappropriate conduct? Nobody told you that this base was supposed to operate according to Navy regulations rather than your personal preferences?" Stevens had no answer for these questions, recognizing that any response would only make his situation worse. The behavior that Sarah was describing had been standard practice at the base for so long that Williams's group had apparently forgotten it was actually wrong. Sarah turned her attention to the other personnel in the area, most of whom were still staring at the unfolding scene in amazement. "The rest of you will return to your duties. Normal operations will continue while I address these disciplinary matters. The staff members quickly turned back to their work, though their attention was obviously still focused on the drama playing out before them. Many of them had been subjected to similar treatment from Williams's group and were clearly enjoying seeing the tables turned. Sarah gathered her documents and walked toward the conference room, expecting Williams, Stevens, and Chen to follow. Her bearing was now completely different from the quiet, unassuming newcomer who had arrived 2 weeks earlier. Every movement conveyed the confidence and authority of someone who had commanded ships and led personnel in challenging situations. As they walked through the corridors toward the conference room, word of what had happened began to spread throughout the base. Personnel who had witnessed the confrontation were already sharing the story with their colleagues, and the news that the mysterious new recruit was actually their incoming commanding officer traveled faster than wildfire. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez was waiting in the conference room when they arrived, having been summoned by Sarah's message. His expression suggested that he had already been briefed on the situation and understood the seriousness of what had occurred. "Please be seated," Sarah said as they entered the room. Williams and his associates took chairs on one side of the conference table, while Rodriguez sat near Sarah's position at the head of the table. Sarah opened her folder and pulled out several documents, including detailed notes she had been taking since her arrival at the base. "Before we discuss the immediate situation," she began, "I want to review some of the things I observed during my assessment period." She proceeded to read from her notes, describing specific incidents of unprofessional behavior, regulatory violations, and inappropriate conduct that she had witnessed. The list was comprehensive and damning, including examples of personnel sleeping on duty, unauthorized absence from assigned positions, inappropriate relationships between supervisors and subordinates, and systematic harassment of newer personnel. Williams and his associates listened in growing horror as Sarah described their behavior in clinical, precise terms that would clearly be devastating in any formal disciplinary proceeding. Every incident was documented with dates, times, and specific details that demonstrated the thoroughness of her investigation. "The behavior I have described," Sarah continued, "represents a systematic breakdown of military discipline and professional standards. More seriously, it suggests a toxic culture that has been allowed to develop without adequate leadership intervention." She looked directly at Williams as she spoke. "Petty Officer Williams, your actions this morning represent the culmination of a pattern of behavior that is completely incompatible with continued military service. Threatening a superior officer, creating a hostile work environment, and systematically undermining military discipline are serious offenses that could result in court-martial proceedings." Williams finally found his voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. "Captain Mitchell, ma'am, I want to apologize for. We didn't realize. If we had known who you were, if you had known who I was," Sarah interrupted. "Are you suggesting that your behavior would have been different if you had known my rank? That implies you believe it's acceptable to treat junior personnel in the manner you demonstrated this morning." This was clearly a trap, and Williams recognized it too late. Any answer he gave would either admit to inappropriate behavior toward junior personnel or suggest that his apology was insincere and based solely on fear of consequences. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean? Petty Officer Williams?" Williams struggled to find an answer that wouldn't make his situation worse, but it was clear that no such answer existed. His behavior had been wrong regardless of Sarah's rank or position, and any attempt to justify it would only demonstrate a continued lack of understanding about basic military standards. Rodriguez spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "Captain Mitchell, what actions do you want to take regarding these personnel?" Sarah looked at each of the 3 individuals across the table before answering. "Petty Officer Williams will be transferred off this base within 48 hours. His conduct demonstrates a fundamental incompatibility with the standards I expect from this command. Petty Officers Stevens and Chen will be placed on formal disciplinary probation, with specific requirements for conduct and performance that will be closely monitored." The relief that Stevens and Chen felt at avoiding immediate transfer was visible, though they clearly understood that their situation remained precarious. "However," Sarah continued, "I want to be absolutely clear about something. The behavior I witnessed during my assessment period ends now. This base will operate according to Navy regulations and professional standards. Without exception, personnel who cannot adapt to these expectations will be transferred to positions where they can receive additional training or separated from service if necessary. She stood up, signaling that the formal portion of the meeting was concluded. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez will provide you with the specific details of your new assignments and requirements. Petty Officer Williams, you are dismissed to begin preparing for your transfer. Stevens and Chen, you will report to the duty officer at 0800 tomorrow morning to receive your new duty assignments. As the three petty officers filed out of the conference room, their demeanor was completely different from the confident, aggressive attitude they had displayed earlier. Williams looked like he had aged years in the space of an hour, while Stevens and Chen appeared subdued and uncertain about their futures. Rodriguez remained in the room after the others had left. Captain Mitchell, I owe you an apology. I should have been more aware of what was happening with Williams and his group. The leadership vacuum here has clearly allowed things to get out of hand. Sarah nodded, appreciating Rodriguez's honesty. The situation here is worse than the reports indicated, but it's not irreparable. We have good people on this base who want to do their jobs professionally. They just need leadership and clear expectations. Over the following days, word of the confrontation and its aftermath spread throughout the base. The transformation in the overall atmosphere was remarkable and immediate. Personnel who had been operating under Williams's informal authority suddenly found themselves following actual Navy regulations again. Work that had been neglected was completed, and the casual disrespect that had characterized daily operations was replaced by proper military bearing. Sarah's approach to command was firm but fair, focused on establishing clear standards while providing support for personnel who were genuinely committed to professional improvement. She implemented new training programs, revised duty assignments to break up problematic cliques, and established open communication channels that allowed personnel to report concerns without fear of retaliation. The base's transformation became a model for addressing similar problems at other installations. Sarah's willingness to conduct an undercover assessment before taking command had provided invaluable insights into the root causes of the disciplinary problems and allowed her to develop targeted solutions that addressed the specific issues she had identified. Within 6 months, Naval Base Charleston had become one of the most efficiently operated installations in its region. The toxic culture that had developed during the previous leadership vacuum was completely eliminated, replaced by an environment where professional excellence was expected and supported. Sarah's unconventional approach to taking command had proven that sometimes the most effective way to understand a problem is to experience it firsthand, even when that experience involves tolerating inappropriate behavior long enough to document its full extent. Her willingness to endure Williams's harassment had provided her with the evidence and understanding necessary to implement lasting changes that benefited the entire base community.